Hello and welcome to Chilltime Happy Time. I'm Rosie.
I'm Abby.
I'm Jake.
I'm JD.
Welcome to our podcast. Please check us out on our socials, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Chilltime Happy Time and our website, chilltimehappytime.com. So hi guys, what's up? How are you doing?
Much, man. Just chilling.
Just chilling. Looking for Danny still. Can't find him.
Yeah, hashtag where's Danny?
Yeah, where's Danny? So today we're actually going to be getting into a discussion of conspiracy theories, which is something that we're going to probably continue to do on this.
Definitely continue.
on
We're going to
this
be coming back to
podcast.
this quite a bit.
There's so many. I mean, we just.
Oh, yeah.
There's so
that
much
are
there.
definitely right.
Yeah. And the first thing we're going to start with is one that actually hits very close to home. Actually, in our town, right down the road, this happened. See, there's this story about he was a 20-something-year-old guy, and he lived down the road from us, and he was loved by all, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, he just disappeared. It was.
I heard he really had a talent for playing the flute.
He did, and some say that on quiet nights, if the wind's not blowing, cars aren't driving around, you can hear flutes playing in the distance.
No,
wow.
I can hear something different. I didn't hear people liked him all that much.
I heard
I heard he was actually the more beautiful of a set of twins.
Oh, wow, that's just false. I mean, these are where these conspiracy theories just get out of hand. They start rewriting history.
It's Daniel. Where is Daniel?
Where's Daniel? I'm sorry, guys. I'm messing with you. We're all just
Donde
wondering
está
where
my
is
freaking
Daniel.
hermano?
Danny's a 27-year-old disappeared without a trace. If you guys find him, just take a picture so we know he's alive.
Yeah.
But we are talking about conspiracy theories today, specifically one that I think everybody has heard about. We are going to be talking about the conspiracy theories revolving. Oh, perfect. Orbiting around the moon landing.
And the conspiracy being that it definitely was fake.
Yes. All right. So
Strong opinions about this. I think we've all got some strong feelings about this subject, so you're going to see him play out here.
Listen,
Oh,
it
yeah.
wouldn't have so much traction if there wasn't some semblance of truth around it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
Big time.
there's a reason that there are these conspiracies. I mean, Watergate was a conspiracy until they proved it right. So maybe
That's
that's the
true.
same with the moon landing.
And just to make it clear, we are talking about
Okay.
the moon landing that occurred. Jacob, let me talk just in case.
Yeah.
We are talking about the moon landing that happened in 1969 with
Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, the boys.
the boys.
Apollo 11?
Apollo
or,
11,
Apollo
yeah.
11.
I don't understand how there were like Apollo 10, Apollo 9, Apollo 8,
Yes.
correct? Because
So
in the
kind of.
documentary that we watched, it totally skipped over those. They talked about Apollo 1 and then they talked about Apollo
Kind
11.
of.
And I was like, well, I don't know what's
actually-
happening.
I could jump in here and give a little insight into the Apollo program, which was definitely real and definitely happened.
So I want to give a little insight first. So I think Abby and JD, you guys did some research into these conspiracies. I'm a big conspiracy theory person, so everything I'm going to pull out is just me denying everything and saying everything's fake. Jake worked at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, guys. That means
Nerd.
That means
I'm
there's
sorry.
a good chance that he is in on the freaking conspiracy.
I
No.
think they paid Jacob to
I'm
be on
just
this
gonna say
podcast.
something. I'm going to say something that, I think the Smithsonian would support me in saying the moon landing fucking happened. It happened. You can't say it didn't
It
happen.
happened eventually, maybe.
Did it happen in
But did it-
1969?
I don't know.
All right. Anyway, back to the Apollo program.
And if
Oh my
it
God.
did happen in 1969, why did Neil Armstrong say what he said and didn't say nice?
What the hell? What are you talking about?
Why didn't
he-
What was that
69?
gibberish?
Stop.
It was 69.
Oh my
Okay,
god.
riddle
Hold on.
me this though, Air and Space Boy. How come Neil A backwards is alien? Give me answers. I demand answers.
Oh, welcome
I'm
to
sorry.
the gallery, everyone.
Go ahead.
Back to the Apollo program. So there weren't exactly like 17 full launched missions, although there was, we went up through Apollo 17.
Well, how about before you start getting into like the whole missions, why don't we talk about what was happening during this time and why we were having these space missions? You know,
Space
talk-
race.
we
The
could talk about the
Soviet.
Soviet Union and how we had the race with them because they had technically won because they had the first person in space. They just didn't have the first person to go on the moon, right?
Kind of. So, and this is another area of misconception.
We both watched that documentary. I'm
and
right.
that documentary had a lot of factual inaccuracies because it was a conspiracy theory
Oh,
documentary.
the tea.
Whoa, calm calling out the documentary.
I'm
Here,
calling them out
guys.
wherever you are, documentary maker. I don't even remember your name.
Conspiracy. How do you say that?
Conspiracies.
Conspiracies on Netflix.
Oh my God, that's
You
what
watched that
where I'm
one.
pulling from too.
Oh,
I watched the same one.
oh, great! So we're all misinformed.
While we're on the topic, if you want to check out our sources, head on over to chilltimehappydime.com. Scroll down to our sources section. There will be a document titled episode, I think 5 this is now. Episode
Yeah, we
5.
don't know.
Yeah.
We just keep putting them out. You guys keep listening. Thanks a lot.
Can I tell you guys, I need to confide in you. I know I said I was kind of like going into this a little blind. I didn't. I did a little bit of research, and I want you to know where I got my sources. My sources are the YouTube comments on conspiracy videos. Deep down, boys. We're getting to the nitty gritty.
Wow.
Oh, God.
Wow. I am
Fun.
very interested to hear what you have to say.
My sources come all from NASA or the National Air and Space Museum, my former place of employment. Shout out to the Explainers program.
Interestingly,
Yeah.
the place that created the conspiracy.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, we do know Apollo 1 did have, of course, a failure on the launch pad, and 3 astronauts were killed in that explosion, that fire, really.
No, well, I didn't think it was, they weren't launching. It was a test. Right?
Apollo 1 was a test. It was a flight test, and,
Are you talking about Gus Grissom?
yes, Gus
Yeah,
Grissom
I have-
ended up
I have
passing
Who was
away there.
I have their names.
Outspoken.
I have their names right here. Lieutenant Colonel Gus Grissom, and his where did I write them? His 2 colleagues, Edward White and Roger Chafee.
Yes.
January 27th, 1967.
And
Right.
Gus was very outspoken that he didn't think it was going to work and that he didn't think that it was plausible that
Interesting.
NASA would be able to go to the moon within that decade-long time frame that JFK had set.
Again, I have to disagree with that narrative that
your
was put by
mouth.
the documentary, because the biggest thing against the moon landing, the biggest thing in these conspiracy theories is that we did not have the rocket technology. We did not have, we would have needed much more cooperation with the Soviet Union, for example, to actually reach the moon in that time period. And those things did happen. We did have the rocket technology, and we were cooperating with the Soviet Union throughout the 1960s, and contributions from us to them and vice versa would eventually land Apollo 11 on the
My
moon.
Samsung Galaxy A20 has more technology in it than the Apollo 11.
Are you calling Netflix a liar?
I'm
you
saying
that
Netflix-
Netflix is wrong?
Netflix broadly embraces freedom of speech in a time that facts are being attacked, and I respect it. But yes, they are wrong. Yes, they are putting infactual things out there. So we had Apollo
Gasp.
1, of course.
Yeah, right?
Then we had some test launches a test launch that was eventually named Apollo 2. Apollo 3 was kind of like, that's something in all my research, I could not find anything on Apollo 3.
Probably didn't happen.
That was one
Exactly.
that I couldn't find, but just so you know, Apollo 1 and 2 were named after the fact. They weren't originally named Apollo 1 until 1967, when it was then named Apollo 1.
Oh my God, how unoriginal. Just think of a different name, right?
Apollo next. Apollo, the good one.
Then
Apollo, the one where they all died.
now we're sounding like Friends episodes.
Apollo Fireball.
Oh, no.
Sorry, guys. We mean no disrespect
No
to the astronaut and the cosmonauts and their families.
Right. But going on, Apollo 4 was something I could find a lot on. So Apollo 4 was pretty significant because this was the first successful launch of the Saturn V rocket, which was the rocket that would eventually take us to the moon. So that was a big one. And then
Supposedly.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
and then after that, they basically just built on the Saturn V launch, attaching more components of the eventual full payload, the thing that they brought into space. And the payload consisted of multiple vehicles, including the command module, the LEM, or the lunar lander. There was multiple parts to it. Altogether, it was called the Eagle. So it would bring the Eagle up, so they worked through that. And then Apollo 8 was really the first big Apollo mission. This one was the first time we actually took pictures of the moon. We did send humans up around the moon. They took pictures and we brought them back.
Impossible. The moon isn't real. The moon is
Oh, yeah?
No, the moon.
You know what? I'm going to be so
Which
bold
is
here.
a whole nother conspiracy. There's literally
Yeah.
conspiracies that the moon isn't real.
I'm going to be so bold here to say that the moon isn't real.
All right. So thanks, Netflix, for misinforming the public again. And then Apollo 9 was test around Earth orbit. So we had actually humans go up just around the orbit. And Apollo 10, we went back around the moon. We did some more calculations on the orbit that we'd have to do around the moon to get the lunar lander. And then, of course, Apollo 11 in 1969 did touch down, and we had 3 astronauts go to the moon, 2 would step foot
in
on
the
moon.
desert on planet Earth.
Oh my!
You can't say
Directed by Stanley
the
Kubrick.
one guy didn't even go. He just kind of shot the other 2 off and then hung out.
No,
What
no,
a bad.
wrong.
Yes, no, that's what happened.
So what Abby's referring to is the pilot of the Apollo 11 mission, an American hero who actually would go on to become the director of the National Air and Space Museum.
Okay, so
a
you're
couple of years
biased
later.
towards this guy.
No, I just think he's contributed a lot to his society and to science.
And he
Whose side-
signs my paycheck.
I was gonna say, whose side's your paycheck?
It was not
Jacob.
him. Anyway, Apollo 11, Michael Collins was the pilot, and he actually never stepped foot on the moon. What his job was to do was to bring the Eagle, remember that's the command module, and the LEM, around the moon, and then they drop off. They disconnect. The command module with Michael Collins in it stayed flying around the moon, while the 2 astronauts, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, in the lunar module, landed on the moon, eventually
Allegedly landed on the moon.
landed on the moon.
Yes.
And they would, they'd do all their experiments, they'd collect the rocks, take their pictures, do their famous sayings, talk to everybody on TV, fire back up to that command module, reconnect in the air above the moon, and come all the way back to Earth.
Yeah,
Is
I'm
what
called
they want
bullshit.
you to think. Yeah, that's what they want you to think.
That's totally what they want you to think.
All right, so I just gave a broad shot at the Apollo program.
Yeah.
But, I mean, seriously, for you guys that really don't think the moon landing happened or have doubts, where do they lie?
So I want to start with just the historical context of and again, this is going to be a very simple, very broad stroke. During the Cold War, there was a huge arms race, huge space race between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. This was an era of extreme fear that, missiles from Russia could come down at any time, any moment. And we watched the same documentary, so I know you know what I'm referencing
Yeah.
right now. And what was interesting about that is that during this era of fear and wildness, think about the pandemic right now, in an era of abject terror, doesn't a governing body have the perfect cream of the crop to just manipulate and tell them whatever they want to tell them? Just make it a little bit easier to, put together that narrative, put together that story, put together that Hollywood image of the moon landing and create it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and another big thing that they were talking about on the documentary was it was so much easier for them back then to fake it rather than to actually put the time, money, and effort to actually having it, happen, having the mission be successful and complete. It was infinitely easier for them to just shoot it and pretend that it happened rather than actually doing it.
See, and what I thought was really interesting about that, so Marcus Allen, he was a journalist that was brought into the mix here. He was a skeptic about this whole thing, and what he cited was that at some point he believed that it might have dawned on someone in the U.S. government that this is getting too risky, and there's got to be some kind of plan B put in place, because
Well, especially after Apollo 1, right? Or what the one where they all blew up. That's
yes,
that one.
yeah, with Lieutenant Colonel
yes,
Gus.
exactly. I mean, that would, I'm sure, show them that this is just way too risky.
Right, definitely. So Lieutenant Colonel Gus Grissom of the U.S. Air Force, we were talking about him before. He was a beloved pilot of the NASA space program, and he was chosen to be among the first to walk on the moon in this program. He, like we talked about, he began to voice his concerns, and he was kind of an outcry child. He was the problem child because he would continue to make mention of the
and making jokes just about how junky the rocket was.
He hung a lemon on the test module, and which
didn't.
he did. And at the time
did,
in
yeah.
the 60s, that was American slang for hunk of junk. You
Yeah,
know, if you
a
thought
car
somebody's
is a lemon.
if you thought somebody's car was a piece of crap, you hung a lemon on it, and that was your way of telling them, hey, you got a hunk of junk there, guy.
But when life gives you lemonade,
That's kind
fake a
of
moon
funny.
landing.
Yeah.
I just, that's such a weird thing, hanging a lemon. I could understand, putting a lemon, on the, steer, on the front of your car, putting it on the roof.
You should have
You
left
literally have to get, string, and, that's a lot of work, to hang a lemon
the
on
first
someone's
lemon
car.
in space.
But so Lieutenant Colonel Grissom was voicing his concerns with the program very much so, that, he thought it was being rushed and pushed through much too quickly at the expense of the safety of the astronauts. And in fact, there was a famous image which we saw where Grissom and some of his teammates were kneeling and praying over a little model of their space capsule. And then, I don't think it's the very next day, but thereafter, January 27th, like we talked about before, they died during that horrific incident with the final systems check.
So there's that speculation that maybe they were trying to hush him because he was so outspoken against it, or that he possibly would not have kept the secret if they did indeed fake it, that he would not be willing to keep quiet about that.
Right.
And I'm putting the notes down. I'm going off script on this one and just saying bullshit. What you have to accept that they would kill this astronaut to, hush him up. What you have to then accept is that the United States government was pouring millions upon billions of dollars into a fake program that could have been, I don't know, maybe a couple $100 for a TV broadcast. So what you have to accept, if you accept that theory, that you have to accept that the United States government would pour billions of dollars, not only kill this chap that's mouthing off against them and saying their thing's as bad as a lemon or whatever.
People have died for worse things.
You're killing two other individuals who are completely innocent in the situation.
Yeah,
perhaps
sure,
just
that's
praying with
fine.
them. Additionally, what you have to accept is that there were no other people in this hundreds of people were involved in getting the Apollo program going. You have to accept that none of them, not a single one of those individuals at Kennedy, at Goddard Space Flight Center, at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory,
it's accepted.
you
We
have to
accept
accept that none of them spoke out and none of them felt it was wrong and nobody
That's
else
where
was
I'm
off,
coming
nor
in.
was the case drawn against their
Listen to
intent.
me.
I mean, it's just outrageous.
I accept it.
I think those people, my whole thing, because that is a big thing that people brought up, was that, they had thousands of people working on this project. They had thousands of people thinking they were working on this project.
Yes.
Isn't that an interesting thing? Jacob's shaking his head right now. Isn't that an interesting
They could have just been playing a fun game. That
Yeah. What I'm saying.
Nintendo's in on it too, man. They
What
made
I'm
a game
saying
for
is-
NASA.
Years ago, I did a space simulation in middle school. And I know that's not even close to the NASA program, but I'm just saying, you can have some computers, you can have the engineers doing the math and everything. You can have people thinking that these people went up to the moon.
Yeah.
Lo and behold, there might have just been a trap door and there
Exactly.
they went into the floor. I'm just saying, everyone that was involved could have been thinking they were really involved in the moon landing. Meanwhile, there were really only a handful of people that knew what actually happened, and they paid, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong a butt ton of money to keep quiet.
You imagine showing up to work every day thinking you're working on one of the most historic, wild moments of scientific history, and you're really just playing a fucking game.
Yeah.
You're really
saying.
just WASDing your way through a Super Mario level.
I've got to be
Well,
honest,
and-
it makes a lot of sense.
It doesn't. It just does not.
And that's why I brought up I know it sounds silly, my middle school space simulation, because that seemed even then you're okay, it's not real. Obviously I took a school bus here and I'm in 7th grade, but that's probably not a very well funded program, but it still felt pretty real. So
yeah.
imagine a millions of dollar program and the amount of money they put into that.
This
Again.
was the 60s, right? So everything was kind of crap anyways. You know what I mean? It wasn't the best quality. So if you
Life.
want,
Civil rights. It was all just shit.
Yeah. I'll give you guys that one.
Thank you.
There was progress to be made there.
Yeah.
but I mean, the
Score
more-
one for the believer. Deniers.
I am an avid gamer. I game so hard. And the more and more I play video games and the better and better they get, the more and more convinced I am that there's a chance we're just living in a simulation,
I hope I'm a sim and that
We
they put
took
me in
the
a
red
pool
pill.
and take the ladder out.
But again, I just want to bring it back to what you have to accept to believe that theory then. That these people were blindly, following and believing that they were working towards a moon mission that never happened.
Wake up, sheeple.
You have to accept that the United States government, during this geopolitical conflict, which everybody agrees was the big cause of the space race, the whole reason we faked, quote unquote, the moon landing, you have to accept that during this perilous time in U.S. history, the government would waste billions of dollars of money and, countless hours of human capital
It wasn't
and
a waste.
resource. Waste it.
Yeah.
for nothing.
It wasn't a
Jabra.
waste. It was to help the illusion that they went to the moon. It was not a
I'm
waste.
sorry, that's the most expensive,
Now hold on,
complicated illusion I've
because the Cold War was a complicated, expensive one-upsman race, and it was a war of one-upsmanship. It was America and the Soviet Union constantly saying, "My dick is bigger." No, my dick is bigger. No, dick is bigger, but Russian. And named Sputnik. No. Hold on, my dick is freedom.
Although I love the idea of this pissing contest, I gotta push back against that misconception too. So I actually have a quote from two scientists who have actually, one was only a scientist. One was
Well, that's just your opinion, science. So
one was a scientist that actually worked for the Soviet Union throughout the 1960s and worked for their space program.
Why are we trusting Russians?
Another is actually the granddaughter of Dwight Eisenhower, who was the first president to reach out to the Soviet Union to have a joint peaceful space program and basically a space treaty. They turned him down, of course, but these two individuals, the granddaughter of President Eisenhower and this scientist, got together, wrote this article about the true nature of the relationship between the Soviet Union space program and the United States during this time, and they made some pretty big distinctions that we, with broad strokes, go right over. Something they said was, the bumpy USSR relationship in the years between 1957 and 1991. So they're including a lot after the space race, of course. With the the International Space Station, of course.
You can't think of it because it doesn't exist.
Oh, my God. Anyway, this period was often characterized by periods of mistrust and over-hostility, right? We've got the U-2 incident, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Vietnam War, Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, etc., etc., etc. But periods of détente, in contrast, led to the Limited Test Ban Treaty in 1963, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty in 72, and an emerging U.S.-Soviet reapproachment during 1985 through 91. So they were basically saying throughout this political roller coaster period of history, both countries increased areas of cooperation, including space, as a symbol of warmer relations, while cutting off such cooperation when ties worsened. And throughout the 60s, there was a period, especially between 62 and 63, where U.S.-Soviet relations were getting real warm, and there was a lot of cooperation going on between our scientists. This, what I'm trying to get at here is there was a ton of cooperation, and to say that this was really a one-upmanship between the two countries, which we all believe, we're all taught, it's just not, of course that's the long-term goal, but in the time, during the space race, that wasn't exactly true. And it was this cooperation that led to the moon landing.
I agree with you on certain levels with that, there was cooperation and that, it definitely wasn't all about one-upsmanship, but overall, the overarching theme of, America versus Russia, ever since the Soviet War, has always been about supremacy. It's always been about who is the best, America or Russia. And during the Cold War, politically speaking, and that is kind of what we're in here, because this is, if we're talking about this conspiracy theory, we're talking about it being a massive, political cover up,
right.
Involving multiple government officials and, literally thousands of employees of people. So, it is this kind of massive thing.
But also just because throughout that decade relations with Russia got better, and it was cyclical, or I guess what would we say,
it was better. Towards the end of the decade it almost completely fell off.
Okay, so whatever, because the relationship was changing doesn't mean that when JFK in his speech said that we are going to get to the moon by the end of the decade, that doesn't mean that they didn't have bad relations then, and then genuinely just said, we don't want to let the American people down, we don't want to go back on what we said, and just that motivation there is what made them fake it.
Overall, at the end of the day, JFK was here in America just swinging his dick across the sea.
Yeah.
Then again,
and Russia was swinging it right back.
Then again, they weren't. And this is another thing I got to push back against. The idea that the moon landing was all thought of.
What about the wind?
No, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
We'll get to that.
Oh, we'll get to the fucking
But let me stay on subject. Let me stay where I was. To say that in the 1960s, the moon landing was entirely thought of, executed, and, or faked, to say, all for political purposes, is just false. the moon landing, the idea of really going to the moon and not just dreaming, of course. There was a film, the first moving picture, actually, I believe, came out in, the early 1900s, was about a moon landing.
I was a communication student over at Dutchess.
Okay.
The first move, I know what you're talking about.
Trip to the Moon is what I'm talking about.
It was one of the first. The very first was of a horse running.
Ah!
That was the very first moving picture.
Wasn't another one
Gotcha.
a train coming towards the screen and people ran out of the way because they thought the train was actually coming?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
That was one of my favorite things in the world. I'm no longer
People.
a communication student. I dropped out. I flunked all my classes at that time. But I really enjoyed those
That
first
was
couple
your first
films.
try at
Right.
college.
That was my first try.
But
I'm on try number 2. I'm doing better.
My point bringing up the film was that all the way back in like the 1800s, people were thinking about going to the moon, of
And
course.
people were
for
faking
all
going to
of
the moon
time.
all that time.
Well, they
Wow.
realized the moon wasn't real once they got
But the
It's
real
cheese.
the real first efforts, the real first strides made towards going to the moon happened right here in the United States of America in 1920. Actually, throughout the early years of World War I, but the work wasn't published by the Smithsonian until 1920. And this was the work of Robert H. Goddard. We've got the Goddard Space Flight Center named after him, of course.
We got that dog in Jimmy Neutron.
Exactly.
Bork, bork.
We've got Robert H. Goddard. This guy in 1920 released a mathematical treatise, it basically was, and it was called A Method of Reaching Extreme Altitudes. And he was the first person to basically just do all the math and be like, yeah, we could get to the moon. Not all of the math, but he developed the idea in this treatise for a new type of rocket that he would invent 6 years later called it's a liquid fuel rocket. Before that, we had solid rockets all the way back to like the Chinese, Mongol, and Indian militaries, even Persian militaries of like the 12th centuries. They'd shoot rockets at each other made out of gunpowder. But this was the idea for a nuanced, measured propulsion for a rocket that could really achieve a flight out of the atmosphere and to the moon. And this was 1926 that this was invented, this rocket. So we're talking 20 years of history in between, and that 20 years accelerated science because, of course, we have World War II.
Now, I think you're forgetting about a famous scientist in the 1820s, Hobart H. Roddard, who stood outside a bar all day long in downtown New York, and he took on passerbys at a challenge that he could make it to the moon, and none of them believed him. But he picked up rocks, and he said, bet your teeth on me that I'll make it to the moon. And they say, okay, I'll bet my teeth. I don't know what that means, but I'll bet them. And he would pick up 2 rocks. He would never show him the second rock. And with his bad hand, he had a bad hand. He would throw 1 rock up at the moon and they would watch the moon go up. And then with his good hand, he would just pelt them right out their mouths. And then he picked up all their teeth and he just took off.
And now, folks, we are part of the cycle of misinformation in the United States of America.
What?
He was a real person.
What just happened? I just was staring at you like, where is this going?
Now
Hobart
that's a
H.
scam how to
Roddard.
make a few
What?
bucks on some teeth.
You can make money off of teeth?
And this was also the first recording
In like
cases of...
revolutionary France,
Don't
yeah.
you remember Les
This was the
Mis?
first recorded
Oh, yeah.
cases of the Tooth Fairy.
Welcome to conspiracy theory
All
number
the research
2.
I did was just brought to nothing.
Wait, the tooth fairy is not real?
It is. It's a man named Hobart H. Roddard.
Oh, okay. Is that who comes into my room?
No,
and
he steals.
gets
Yeah,
my
he
money?
steals teeth.
Exactly.
And he steals-
If
Yeah.
you don't want him to throw a rock at your mouth, you nicely put the tooth under your pillow.
And the reason you put him under your pillow is because there was a massive conspiracy in which he was like, I'm getting too old for this, throwing the rock bit. And he was like, listen, parents, start telling your kids to just leave their teeth under the pillow when they fall out. I'll just come and swipe them. You can tell them a fun story about the Tooth Fairy, and that's where we get
So now the
There you
parents
go.
are in on it.
Oh, yeah.
These are
everybody's
where
in
the
on it.
holes in all these conspiracies lie.
No.
There's just a hole. You got to find it.
No. It's a
What do you
folk
mean?
tale
He
passed down
filled
from
the hole.
generations.
He filled the hole.
But I thought we were talking about the moon.
Yes, let's get back to the moon.
Now we're talking about the tooth fairy, and now I'm finding out that the tooth fairy doesn't exist. What's next? You're going to tell me Santa's not real?
Oh,
Rosemary.
I don't think we can go
Of
there.
course
Okay,
he's real.
Anyway, back to Goddard. He built a liquid fuel rocket in 1926, and 6 years before that, in 1920, released basically a game plan on how to get to the moon. Of course, it was way far off, and people worked on it, but that's what made him famous, really, wasn't just the rocket he built, that Wernher von Braun, who would eventually build the Saturn V rocket that, flew the Apollo missions to the moon. It was the treaties that really inspired people like Wernher von Braun and got them working. Of course, Wernher von Braun is a very complex character. I don't know how much you guys know about him.
Zero.
Yeah.
Literally nothing.
He was a Nazi. He lived in Germany. He was a German scientist, and in 1933...
And you choose to call him interesting? That's how you describe
Well, he got us to the moon. The weird thing... And this is something...
got us to the moon.
Nazi slingshot.
This is a
got
point...
or got in.
If I can, this is a point I wanted to bring up really bad, is something before you were saying about the governments, between the United States and Russia during the Cold War, were all about, this one-upmanship over a long period of time. And in that, you've got to assume that every citizen buys into that and does it on their government's part that's involved. And that was not the case between the Soviet Union and the United States. Many scientists wanted and did work together and looked forward to periods of political warmth where their countries could get together and those scientists could get together and share. Now, Wernher von Braun had a very strong allegiance to Germany, and during World War II, that would make him a very, unfortunately, successful Nazi scientist. He developed the V-2 rocket that was responsible for over 3,000 deaths at least in World War, and that's just me going off the top of my head. I'd love to get the real numbers off that. But the V-2 rockets, which would eventually become the Saturn V rocket, the Saturn V was built off that, they were used to kill in World War II on behalf of the Nazi regime.
Interesting.
Now, this same character, when we got into the Cold War and we saw all of a sudden Russia, because Russia was ahead of us with their missile technology, we saw them start to build these intercontinental ballistic missiles, and we were like, holy shit, what's Wernher von Braun up to? And this is the part of American history people often forget, is that we were very friendly to Nazis and former Nazis after World War II because they were so anti-communist. That was part of their fascist, orientation. So
but which I really don't understand, because aren't Nazis like communists, like all the same? Like I know they're not.
They're all dictators, but they're political.
Nazis kind of came from fascism.
Absolutely did.
But isn't it the whole concept? You have one leader and you do everything under the. I mean, did they have free market?
Well,
is that why they weren't communist technically? Because
they didn't have free market. They basically had a total government controlled market on behalf of certain private individuals and businesses, i.e. German Aryan quote unquote businesses, right? Like they could use their institutions of government, not unlike that's happened in America and other places in history, to just totally marginalize certain groups of people, whereas communism is all about the party. And yes, it does become a dictatorship, especially in Soviet Russia, but it is a dictatorship on, this is weird to say, it's a dictatorship on behalf of the people, at least the way it manifested itself.
Yeah.
Whereas fascism really is a dictatorship on behalf of
the few,
of fear and views,
which
and
in reality,
ideas.
like
the few, right?
if like Karl Marx, when he discussed communism, it was to benefit the greater, like to the greater numbers of the country, whereas fascism's kind of it's to benefit the few, not in a capitalistic way as our
then
society
why are
is.
people all like,
in
hell,
a, like
hell yeah,
higher
let's
up.
do it. It's like you're scared of getting murdered by those fewer, people
in
that are at the
in
top.
communism or in fascism.
In fascism,
because they control everything.
But how do they control everything? Like
Through
who is
fear,
the
mostly.
enforcement?
The
Fear
thing
and
of fascism
propaganda.
is you
Don't you
become
need-
above the law. And that did happen in communism too, although it's not, the way it's written out supposed to. It did manifest itself that way in Soviet Russia, especially with Stalin. But the thing is, you are above the law. If the government decides that you need to die, you're dying. And there's no recourse for repercussion. You're not going to court. You're not suing anybody. Like in America, we see unjust death happen all the time that the government, of certain states carries out against people. But you have courses usually of repercussion, right? You can try to hold your government accountable. That's not even a freaking thought in a fascist society.
Yeah. Anyway, we're way off topic. Let's get back to the moon. Somebody's got to go there.
The wind.
The wind.
The dust.
Somebody's got to go to the
dust
moon.
had to be several feet long.
Right.
The light. There's so many different things that we can talk about.
Oh yeah, I mean, let's talk about the flag
None of
for
the
a second.
astronauts would pray on that Bible that guy was running around.
Where did they poop, guys?
All right, you want to talk
I
about?
can tell you where they pooped.
I don't want to know.
They pooped into the hands of taxpayers that they were lying to.
They pooped into vacuum-packed bags that were then sealed and brought down into the earth and disposed of properly.
Now, what would happen if you lit it on fire and left it on someone's porch?
Oh my god!
So I want to talk to you guys for a minute about a guy named Bart Sibrel. Now we talked about him a little bit before. Bart Sibrel is a American filmmaker. He made the The documentary, you can find it on YouTube. It's 47 minutes long. It's called Something Funny Happened on
Is
the Way
it
to the Moon.
technically a movie if it's only 47
He
minutes?
calls it a movie, but it's definitely a documentary.
Like an episode.
It's like, he's a conspiracy theorist, so, he calls anything anything he wants.
Whoa,
Facts don't matter. It doesn't matter that it's not a
He's
full
an
feature.
American hero.
But anyway, listen. So he claims the men of Apollo 11 only went a few hundred miles up into the Earth's orbit and returned elsewhere instead of going all the way to the moon. The video footage of the Apollo 11 mission was stunning, to say the least, but for a long time, not a very long time, but for a bit after, NASA refused to give the raw footage up to media companies for some time. And when it was finally released, an accidental, raw, and unedited version was in circulation for a short time. And on the front screen, it implicitly stated, not for public use, not for view of the general public. Now, this could be for copyright, this could be for many different things, but
we know
Bart
that it's
Sibrel.
because they had something to hide.
Bart Sibrel believes that this was because they, like you said, they had something to hide. Why wouldn't you want the general public seeing this? So at the beginning of the video, we see a shot of the Earth from the moon, and the first thing that we hear is a transmission between Armstrong and NASA when Apollo 11 was approximately 100,000 miles away, nearly halfway there. NASA says in this I almost said podcast, in this transmission, the TV picture looks great. And then, after about a 4-second delay, which was the time it would have taken for that transmission to get from Earth to the capsule 100,000 miles away, we hear an unnamed third party quietly say, talk, just before Neil Armstrong begins to reply. Now, seemingly harmless, but the theory here from Bart Sibrel is that in the Area 51 studio, there was someone with a stopwatch timing a fake 4-second delay to simulate the amount of time it takes to get a message from the Earth to where the craft would have been. Sort of a wild claim, but for those of us that have been involved in theater and show production, it's not the craziest thing I've ever heard.
I mean,
No,
that's
not
literally
at
how
all.
they did the doors in The Office. They literally had it on a timer. I'm
Yeah.
bringing up The Office because I
Oh,
love it.
yeah.
Bring up
They
The
literally,
Office in every episode.
And lights, like if they hit a light switch, there was like a delay. Like they timed it. Like everything's timed.
Absolutely.
Now, this is where I'm going to be devil's advocate for the factual here. The United States was incredibly ahead of Soviet technology in the field of communication. Communicating, from a location on Earth to outer space was something that the United States did have a one-up on them. And that was actually something that the Soviet Union benefited from cooperating with the United States. They got all this technology. The communication technology is there. Why fake it? You've really got the technology. Both countries can sign off on the fact that you've got the technology to communicate well beyond the moon. Why fake it? Why even fake going to the moon? That doesn't make sense.
Because they couldn't.
Technology. They absolutely could.
What makes you think that they have the technology? Yeah.
They had the Saturn V rocket,
The
which launched
same
successfully
information
in
that's telling us that they landed on the
Right.
moon. It's
Right.
all.
So this is where you get to just hating on every fact that is actually true. And this stuff happened. You can't deny that in 1967, a Saturn V rocket successfully brought the payload needed for the Apollo
deny
mission.
it.
I can and I will. I can and I will because guess
You
what?
can't let me rephrase. You can't reasonably deny that.
Let me just come back
I have
real quick
reasons.
to let me just come back and bring up Bart Sibrel one last time.
Please.
Bart went on a little quest, after he compiled a lot of this information and made this movie, in which he decided it was his destiny to make the Apollo astronauts and people involved in the conspiracy confess on television. And he went around with a camera crew, kind of like the punked people or the catfish guys, like, hey, gotcha. And he
Like
went
Chris
up.
Hansen.
He went up to many astronauts and scientists of the Apollo mission, and he brought a Bible up to them, and he was like, if you walked on the moon, I want you to put your hand on this Bible and swear to it. And not a single one of them would, and they all met him with hostility. Now, to be fair, most of the time, he was kind of an asshole about it.
All of the time.
But one time,
these are all God-fearing men, so why wouldn't they? Were they scared that they would be smited from above if they lied on the Bible?
Speaking of being smoted, he got smoted when he went up to Buzz Aldrin and called him a coward and a liar, and Buzz all 78 years of him just rocked this dude right in the middle of his face.
Right in the face.
Yeah.
Amazing video footage.
No proponent of violence, but I gotta say, for somebody who was ballsy enough like Buzz Aldrin to step in a rocket ship, blast off the face of Earth, land on the moon, and come back and have some jerk who was born 30 years later probably come in your face and go, you're a coward. Good for Buzz Aldrin, man. I would have punched him too.
You know what, Buzz,
I gotta be real. That guy was a dick. I was very happy when I saw that.
I mean, Buzz and all those guys, you know, they were like younger in like the 40s and 50s. Like they're old school dudes. You know, if you question their manliness, like you're likely to get hit or get the crap beaten out of you. So like, I'm surprised that's the only time he got punched. Honestly,
Right.
He's the only one that actually had the balls to do it.
Yeah.
That is great because, you know, you see all these. I mean, Buzz Aldrin was at the freaking State of the Union either this year or the year before to just see the image of that man punching somebody in the face. I mean, it was funny.
It really was.
And with that punch in the face, we are going to head into a quick break. We're not going to punch each other. We're going to go get some beer and some pizza. Before we leave, let's have a shout out to our food and booze sponsor for the evening, Sean Patrick Henry. I can't even pronounce his name.
Yes, my dad.
Yeah,
he
he's
decided
dad.
to treat us to some
Hooking
nice
it up.
pizza mott sticks. So
If you want to treat us to pizza and booze, check us out on our socials or on our website, chilltimehappytimes.com.
Actually, just text one of us.
we'll
please.
give you a
Yeah,
shout
just
out
hit
if
us
you
up.
do.
Yeah.
So
We'll be right back.
Bye. And we're back. What's up, guys? I hope you all are, I don't know, we're a little
Okay.
cozy in here.
Yeah,
I know, I'm saying I hope you're like curled up with like a warm drink or, you know, ready to talk about some boring rocket stuff.
It's gonna be summer. It's
Just
gonna be
kidding.
like
We're
late
talking
May.
about
I just want to mention, Abby did say during the break to me that this rocket stuff was boring. So if you guys feel the same way,
yeah, that was the whole point of the warm
wow.
drink to be
Oh my
curled up to
God.
listen to some boring rocket stuff.
We're curled up in here with Corona Light, Dr. Perky, and White Claw.
I'm currently drinking tea in two forms. I have iced tea and hot tea, so I
Well,
got
you're a
into
hot
the
tea,
form.
so
Ooh.
Are you hitting on my wife?
yeah, I did.
On
I beat
air?
you to it.
All right, guys.
I was
So,
doing it 4 years ago, man.
oh my God. Anyway, we're
fighting over you.
we're still talking about the conspiracy theory revolving around. I made that joke twice now. Revolving around the moon landing. So where did we leave off, guys? What's going on?
I don't know.
We're talking about how it definitely did not happen.
I just want to talk about all the inconsistencies when the men are actually on the moon, when you see the
Yes.
footage. You know what I mean?
right.
So I wanted to bring up a few things about that, but one thing I'm going to say in particular. So the cameras that were rigged up not only to the astronauts' outfits but also to the ship, the viewfinder was removed from them before launch, and that took out the mirror. You know, this was in the 60s. The viewfinder was the little mirror hole that you stuck your eye in, and you could see what the camera was picking up. You know, we don't have that nowadays. Nowadays we have a touchscreen that shows us the image. But anyway, they took out the viewfinders in order to make it better to, you know, adapt to, attaching it to the uniforms and to the pieces of the ship. And the images that came back, although it was the 60s and we would say that they're bad today, they were brilliant images at the time. And since there was no viewfinder, that would have meant that these astronauts would have had to have adjusted the aperture, the shutter speed, all of these different, you know, kind of settings on the camera by hand. And those hands were enclosed in thick battle gauntlets that they used to keep their fingers and their bodies sealed and away from the vacuum of space.
It was impossible for them to have used, for them to have pressed and changed and used different little levers to get those pictures to the quality
because
that
it used
they
to
were.
be little buttons and little levers.
Yeah,
it wasn't
exactly.
every-
Be a little scrolling this and pushing
Have
that.
you guys ever put like snow gloves on or like skiing gloves and like you really can't move your fingers?
Oh my
Like
God. Yeah.
imagine trying to sew with that.
Now,
Yeah.
let me argue here, and this actually was on the documentary, so I'll apologize to Netflix. It's not all factual inaccuracies. On this documentary, they did bring somebody on who said there were hundreds of pictures, maybe thousands of pictures, and they eventually would all become public record. And you can go through and see that most of these pictures are freaking blurry and terrible. And you got to think, if these guys are just mashing the buttons with their gauntlets, yeah, they're going to get some bad pictures, but eventually you're going to capture something. And those were the public pictures.
I'm picturing like a medieval knight in shining armor with like a modern camera, just like, hey, I will press the button and move the aperture to get the perfect shot of my lovely steed in the hill.
If they had all this technology, why didn't they make the buttons bigger? Why didn't they make a big red button?
Right. Now, there's actually a lot of cool things of this between, especially the contrasting Soviet and eventually Russian and American space programs, is sometimes the Americans just did some weird shit. The American space program,
Tiny
NASA,
buttons and big gloves.
TikTok.
NASA, and there's some movie, I think it's Apollo 13,
Rubber
the movie.
gaskets?
No, not the rubber gaskets.
Carol
It's the
Baskin.
pen. The pen and the pencil. I believe they say it in Apollo 13.
Wait, I actually
it might
did
be
hear that.
in
Like the
Interstellar,
rubber
another space
thing where
movie.
you spin
They
it?
were basically saying the NASA spent actually, I think, close to $1 million to develop a pen that could work in anti-gravity, where you don't need gravity pulling the ink down to the ballpoint to actually work. You know what the
Russians
Soviets did?
They had a pencil.
They used a pencil.
That's almost like.
So there's things
Why are
like
you
I
that.
working
remember
so
hearing
much
about
harder?
that.
Yeah.
Well, you know what it is? It's
Shout
like,
out to that movie that uses
listen,
that line. It's a great
we
line.
all remember being in elementary school and middle school where they would not let you use a pen or they'd get all mad. You know those teachers that are
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you can't use a pen, blah, blah, blah.
Ooh, and then they came out with a
That
erasable pen.
That kid grew up and was like, I will make a pen that works in space. Pencils are for babies. Pencils are for...
And this guy's out here like realizing his life's ambition to make this pen, and meanwhile the Russians are like, just use a fucking pencil.
Plus, you can erase pens. Like, I know they had the erasable pens. That didn't really catch on.
No, and you really can
Because
erase
you
the
can
whole
use a
thing.
pencil. That's
Those are
the point.
Now, I
Those
would
erasable
argue
pens aren't even really
maybe you're
erasable.
concerned, maybe if you're a really meticulous scientist, about little bits of lead or graphite, whatever was on the pencil, breaking off and floating in the air in the
Well, that's
spacecraft.
technically-
People with graphite in their eyeballs and they're fine.
But that's technically flammable, is it not? And
I don't
from
know.
what I understand, with the horrible thing that happened to Lieutenant Colonel Gus. Oh, I want to say his name right, but I can't remember. I'm just going to say
Right,
Gus.
the Apollo 1 mission is
The
who you're
Apollo
referring
1
to.
mission
Take
with
the
three
audio
men
from
past there.
earlier
Yeah.
and just put it over.
But during the catastrophe, when those three men burned up, it was largely because there was we still for facts purposes, we don't have the real reason why it happened, like scientifically, like what was caused in there, but it looks like because it was a highly pressurized cabin with a lot of oxygen, something sparked slightly and caused a crazy flame. So if that were to happen, wouldn't having graphite, which is also, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, I've never taken a chemistry course or anything like that, but I'm pretty sure graphite is flammable, is it not?
I'm not
I don't
sure.
know.
I've never had a pencil go up on me. So.
But lead. When did
it
lead?
is.
When did they stop putting lead in pencils?
A long time
Long
ago.
time.
Graphite flammable.
We're consulting
Let's
with
see.
the internet.
Dun, dun, dun.
Cameo chemical graphite is not flammable
Yeah.
in bulk form, but combustible. So that's
So it can
So
explode.
it can cause a flame,
Yeah.
and in a highly pressurized cabin, that could be a concern.
So are you telling me I can make a hand grenade with a pencil?
I think what we're telling you is the Russians were just freaking ballsy. They didn't care. They just went for it. They were
Use
like,
a fucking pencil.
use it. Who cares?
oh god, the Russians drink vodka for breakfast. They are the definition of ballsy.
I mean, so do I, but none of you complain about me.
Well, Rosie, I would call you ballsy.
Yeah, I call you ballsy.
I'm kidding. I eat yogurt.
with vodka.
All right. Next thing that I need to confront is the wind. I know I made jokes before, but I watched that footage, Jacob, and that flag is blowing in the wind.
So that is the one thing I do have to say. So I know people say, oh, it's a vacuum. The flag would have just fallen and, whatever. My concern is when you're looking at the footage is the bottom left corner of the flag. That is literally flapping. Like I get there's a bar in it and everything, but it actually looks like it's weight. And I know they're
Yeah,
moving it
it's-
around.
Now,
I
just to be
get
clear for the
that.
viewers, in this footage, the bottom left corner is detached from the pole.
It is. So
Right.
if you're looking at it, I think you're looking at it from behind the flag.
Yeah.
So the stars are in the top right corner and the bar is going across the top, because if they didn't have that, and they were correct, it doesn't look good for TV if the flag's just like, wham, wham, and literally, like a sad little flag, just like But anyway, but it's that bottom left corner, and it literally is waving in a way. And when you understand how a vacuum works, you know, a force is applied and it continues infinitely. But in here, it's literally like, and the force at this point is, I think is it Buzz Aldrin that's doing the flag?
Did he put the flag down?
Well, one of them is putting the flag down. The other is actually holding the flag and adjusting it and like straightening it.
Yeah, like I don't remember whoever is putting it into the ground.
Because there's a director on the other side saying, "Hey, move the flag a little bit. The camera can't pick it up."
Yeah, if you watch the footage,
there's a director at JPL Laboratories talking to them from Earth, hundreds of thousands of miles away. I believe
hundreds of thousands of like millimeters away.
What I'm saying is, if you really watch that footage, it doesn't act like how forces do in a vacuum, and it's really interesting. And I you know, I'm not a physicist in any way, shape, or form. I did take a high school physics class though, but that's besides the point. I'm just saying it flaps. It literally flaps in a way that is not responding necessarily to the correct movement. It's almost moving by itself.
Because even if you look at where they're grabbing the flag and maybe where they're touching it a little bit on that corner, it would not react in the way that it is reacting on the film. It is literally flapping, Jacob, and they're not even touching it and it's flapping.
And here is something I do want to point out. The one astronaut, I don't know if it's Buzz or Neil, does touch that bottom corner of the flag slightly at the beginning of that shot to straighten it out. So I say to believe that bottom corner moves a bit when his hand moves, that's not beyond the realm of possibility.
Okay, but what I'm saying is the physics of a vacuum. If he touched that corner, it would go just into that direction. It would not return.
Well, and
because then a separate force would have to act upon it on the other side to bring it back.
If I can.
It is Newton's law, Jacob.
Something that Apollo 17 would end up finding out is that the moon, not really a vacuum. It's got a very slight atmosphere.
More of a moon.
It's more of a moon. It's actually got an atmosphere that they think is the most common in the universe, called a surface boundary exosphere. So it's a very thin atmosphere. Compared to ours, it's infinitesimal.
Nerd alert.
It's like super small. Yeah, I'm a nerd. All right? If you didn't know this already,
rocket stuff.
I'm a nerd. It's got an...
Geeking out.
I'm geeking out. It showed at the Star Wars episode. It's showed again now.
Yeah,
I think I said dorking out. I'm a dork. I love it.
I think we just need to send Jacob to space.
I'm not good with spaces and heights.
Or we'll send Jake into orbit, bring him back, and make it look like he went to space.
Honestly, do it. I would be honored to have my own personal faked moon landing. But that doesn't.
Are you going to be able to keep that lie?
Apollo 11 didn't land. I'll tell everybody it was fake. I'll be like, yeah, but look, it looks like I actually landed.
So they'll kill you before that even happens.
Maybe, but it would all be worth it.
Anyway,
the moon landing happened.
The government is paying him so much money. I really
surface boundary exosphere. Excuse me, the Dr. Perky setting in.
Oh, it's getting perky.
Okay, can I just say that doesn't mean drugs? He's literally drinking an off-brand Dr. Pepper. I don't want people thinking we're doing.
It's a Hannaford brand. Dr.
I didn't put that together.
Pepper.
I'm drinking
not a
Hannaford
sponsor.
brand Dr. Pepper, and I am off the walls because of it. So there is a surface boundary exosphere, and it's a very small atmosphere, very thin, very close to the surface. But to believe that there's nothing around the moon is a misconception. There could be a little bit of wind. I'm not saying there's storms of any kind, but we do know that the moon once had liquid water on the surface. At least we can strongly believe that. And we also know that it seems there's evidence that it was brought from pole to pole, suggesting that there's even a small water cycle on the moon in this boundary exosphere.
What does pole to pole mean?
Pole to pole, baby.
Like North Pole to South
North
Pole.
to South.
Yeah.
Are there poles on the moon?
There are poles on the
So
moon.
from like
no,
Santa's
that was a trick
workshop
question. The
to-
moon doesn't exist. There's nothing on it.
Well, so now you're bringing up an interesting point. So does that mean that there is an atmosphere, a certain kind of environment on the moon? If you're saying that there is a water cycle, then
Very
are there
small water cycle,
Are there
just enough
wind
to move
patterns
water
that we don't know
molecules.
about?
There could
Because if there is, then yes, the flag makes sense. But I've never never heard that there are wind
To
patterns.
say there's
on
wind
the
patterns
moon.
we don't know about, I can't say because we could know about them. I don't know about them.
And you want to know
But
one of the
there is
main
an
reasons
atmosphere.
why I argue about a wind pattern on the moon is because of the dust and the craters that exist on the moon.
Yes.
If there were more wind, as in the kind that could move a flag, then dust would be blown more into the craters
Right.
that currently exist, because that's the whole point. That's why there's not dust floating around the atmosphere, because if it had that kind of atmosphere, dust would still be lingering in there.
Now that's an excellent point. So I
Thank
think
you.
just
I like
beat up wind.
science.
But let me float this out there. Let me float this out there.
Like the non-existent dust particles in the moon's atmosphere.
But if there's a surface boundary exosphere, a very light atmosphere, no wind even, not anything to support any type of weather, maybe not even a water cycle, we could even throw that out, although they believe it. I think it's enough to say that if the astronaut, Buzz or Neil, whoever was pulling that corner of the flag, nudged it, there could be enough molecules in the air to cause friction and eventually slow the pattern of that flag down, like we do see in the video.
But enough to have it be literally wagging like it was in that
Well,
video? 'Cause that's the whole thing.
There,
is it
I'm
was
arguing the
wagging.
wagging. The wagging was from the astronaut. That's what I'm
Okay.
arguing. I'm arguing this from
Did
the
you
hand.
watch
Because
the
he
video?
was
I
turning
did, and
and
he
spinning it.
He pulls the
No,
flag out
not
and
to
he
the
spins
point
it.
that you're saying.
Well, that's where it's up to your own opinion.
Yeah.
For me, I wouldn't go from that little discrepancy and say they faked the whole thing in millions of dollars and they killed people and hit all of them. But if that's what you want to do, I guess you do you.
Oh my
I
God.
guess.
Okay, but this is also
Don't you talk down
this
to us,
is-
you Smithsonian employee.
This is my argument. Say they did fake it and that's the truth and everything. It's really not that big of a deal. It really doesn't change much. We still eventually probably went back and
No.
That's
I'm,
the-
you know what I mean?
that's one
It's
of
not
the-
that big of a deal
I
if
hate
it
to
really
say it,
was.
that's one of the comments that I saw on the YouTube videos where someone literally was like, who cares? All the boomers that they were trying to impress with this anyway are going to be dead soon. And I was like, Jesus.
Oh my gosh.
Well,
people
morbid,
people
but
were
what the
brutal
crap.
in the comments. They were like,
Right.
who cares? Because all the patriots are going to be dead. I'm like, oh my God, guys.
Oh
But
my
and
God.
this is what
Okay,
kills
boomer.
me. This is what kills me. You know who cares? The people that care are the geologists who
I
really want to
know,
go back
I
to the
know.
moon. They really want to excavate that thing. They really want to find out where the moon exactly. They want to pin down where this thing originated from. I know somebody out there wants
It
to
came
say
from
definitively.
Don't we know that?
That's
Isn't
a
that-
theory.
isn't that-
And
It's
listen,
a theory. There's a
as-
lot of
as
evidence to prove
someone
it.
that does really
but
do
we
like
need more
science, I do want to know more about the moon. I do appreciate, and if we did land on the moon, then awesome. We do know stuff about the moon.
The moon, guys,
but
the
moon is made of cheese.
The
Yes.
moon is Sokka's girlfriend. It's a waterbender.
Yes. Oh, wait,
Little
did
preview for our
you
after
guys
episode.
ever-
Love
did
that
you guys
show.
ever watch Wallace and Gromit? Completely sidetracking Wallace and Gromit. It's
No.
it's the same guys that did Chicken Run. It's
conspiracy
literally-
theorists sidetracking. What a surprise!
Wow. All right, let's get right back on it.
I'm saying it's a claymation video from England, and I think it's a little movie, and it's about a guy and his dog that take a little rocket
Oh,
up to
yeah.
the moon,
Yeah.
and they find out it's made of cheese, and they eat the cheese moon. I'm just
See,
saying.
and that's why there's no more moon. That's why the moon doesn't exist because they ate it already.
Not only do we not land on the moon's not fucking real, man.
Well, if the moon is cheese and they did eat the moon, they definitely started at the South Pole because the South Pole of the moon, fun fact for you guys,
Boring
has
rocket
cheese,
stuff.
a crater the size of the United States of America.
Well, so why
Really?
would they
Yeah.
have to start there then?
Well, I'm just saying somebody clearly ate that. I mean, that's just gone.
that
There's-
was
there's
gonna
a
say,
chunk of
that
US
was-
Jacob just
yeah.
want to throw a fact in there.
I just wanted to throw a fact about the very real moon out there.
I didn't like the connection, but okay. Okay.
You wanted to throw an idea about
Yeah.
the possibly real moon, but probably not.
All
Guys,
right.
just go outside and look up tonight. Just do it.
No.
Yeah, look at the backdrop the government's created for you.
All right. Next point is that the light that you see in these photos and in the video, that was electrical light. That was light that was made by lights. I don't know how to say
By
it.
lights. So
like the sun?
No,
not
I
from the
know what you're
sun.
saying. I know.
like a stage light.
No, I know what you're saying though, because it does seem like there's multiple light sources. There's a famous image where I believe Buzz
It's coming out of the
of the capsule, and the sun is positioned behind. The sun isn't in the shot, but it is positioned behind where the capsule is, and so the capsule is casting a shadow down over where Buzz is. So he's in shade. However, he's got light on him. He's
that light come
visible.
from?
Where did that light come from? And now the argument is that the moon, because it doesn't have an atmosphere and it's
The
gray, it's a reflective surface. It puts the light on him.
Bullshit.
Yada yada yada. Here's what I think.
Oh, God.
I think there was an entire truss system with multiple light sources, and one of them was just dully shining on our friend Buzz Aldrin, just to give him a little bit of pizzazz when he was coming out of the ship.
Yep, I think so too.
So here's where I'm going to throw this in your face. Really glad you guys brought this up earlier. What you're saying is that a country, an institution within a country that had the technology to get to the moon, they had the communication technology to get there, they knew what to do, but they would eventually fake it. You're saying they're so smart. They're just gonna neglect the fact that there's only one light source in our solar system just to make Buzz look a little pizzazzy.
Well, it's not. Listen,
It's not a call BS.
These government agents aren't lighting technicians. They got it a little bit wrong. Maybe they hired someone who was working on a Broadway show, and they just knew they're like a little bit extra light right on Buzz.
It was like somebody. It was like somebody who was like an understudy and didn't get the part. Now they're salty, so they're like, I'm gonna ruin this show. It's gonna be shit. Yeah, put some light on him right there. That'll really shine the fucking place up.
Oh man, it's not real.
It's not. It's definitely not.
I'm speechless. I'm just speechless because we're talking about a mistake with the lighting. That, I mean,
A carefully calculated error.
something a 4th grade earth science student could understand is like false. There's only one light source in the solar system.
Don't give 4th graders that much credit.
I'm giving them that much credit. We're saying that all these astrophysicists just totally blanked on that, or somebody was malicious enough to just throw that detail.
Absolutely.
I don't know.
So can we talk about Can we talk about the Judica Cordiglia brothers real quick?
Let's do it.
Oh yes.
Throw that. Let's find some more shit to pull out of the
really
book.
Quick? How did they pronounce it in the documentary?
I don't even remember, but it's Judica Cordiglia from what I'm reading.
It's not
and it's
Judia
probably
Cordia?
Judia Cordia? Cordia?
I'm pretty sure GLI.
Maybe.
I don't know.
should
Italians, don't call me out. I'm pretty sure GLI makes a yeast sound. Like familia.
If you want to know where most of our sources are coming from, watch that documentary on Netflix. It's a part of the
Netflix.
It's a whole series.
I would encourage you to go to the
yeah.
National Air and Space Museum website and teach yourself something.
Oh my god.
I would encourage you to go onto, I don't know, like a Postmates and order some Taco Bell right now. But
Yeah,
that's
do that.
unrelated.
That's the best option.
Get
That's it.
Postmates
That's
in
chill.
our area.
We don't.
I
We
don't
live in the
think
middle
so.
of nowhere.
We got
Yeah, we live
Grubhub.
in
We
the
got
middle of nowhere.
Grubhub.
You'll never find us. But anyway, the Judica Cordiglia brothers were Italian radio enthusiasts in the 1950s. They put together their own small little battle station in their home of communications and signaling equipment, and during the Russian Sputnik launch in 1957, they were actually able to listen in and record the faint beeping signal from the Sputnik. This spurred a love in them like no other, and the brothers began trying to listen in on every launch that they could. Fast forward to February 1961 at 10 in the evening, the brothers recorded some signals that they got from a Soviet launch in which they heard horrid, heavy breathing and what sounded like an alarm going off. Now, one of the brothers at the time was a medical student, and he consulted one of his professors about the recording, and upon hearing it, the professor diagnosed the man heard on the recording as having been deprived of oxygen for some time. This was potentially why we would imagine that the alarm had been going off in the background. Maybe, whoever was in the capsule had the oxygen cut off to them, and they were literally suffocating. The Moscow government announced no manned mission that day or anywhere near that day, and never commented on the recordings. The brothers then became famous in Italy for everything that they were doing and their whole little battle station down there. And they expanded their operation to the point of setting up their own private mission control, with much better equipment. In 1963, with this enhanced setup, they got a recording from another apparent secret Soviet mission in which a woman is heard frantically saying, "I see a flame," and asking, "Will I come home?" The communications then stopped.
Now, this is all before the first reported man just flying in space, right? These incidents, or these are after.
So Yuri Gagarin was the first official man in 1961 that Russia sent up into orbit. So the first recording in February 1961 was before that, I believe, like directly before that.
Okay.
I believe Yuri went up in July of 61.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then in 1963, this one with the woman that we're talking about, this was a few years afterwards.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they're thinking that there were failed launches or launches that
Yes.
ended up failing in space that they
Yeah.
were able to capture.
Yeah, due to this and the long train of Soviet lies, it's no secret that the Soviets are quite good at covering themselves up in times of embarrassment and times of failure. This has led people to believe that the Soviets actually sent many failed missions and killed many in the Great Space Race by either accidentally depriving them of oxygen or just letting them drift into space with no rescue attempt.
Now that is interesting. About everything that's come out of your mouths today has really upset
Has been
me.
gold. Has been absolute gold.
Has really seemed just totally,
Hey,
unfactual.
I think I had some pretty good points.
You had some good points, especially with the
I
moon
brought up Taco Bell. Like,
and Taco Bell. But that story, it holds true to at least what we know historically. Space program was military run. It was incredibly secretive. In fact, when, we talked a little bit earlier about these scientists wanting to share on both sides, and during periods of detente, warmer relations, they would share. The Soviet scientist that actually wrote that article I referred to earlier, that NASA article with Eisenhower's granddaughter, he said that so even when there were agreements between political leaders to share between the scientists, the Soviet scientists actually had a lot of trouble getting the military leaders in the country to share their information, their planned experiments, whatever they were going to do with the American scientists. Even in the science community, and this is the major difference between NASA and the Soviet space program, NASA was a civilian-oriented program, and that's what makes the idea that the Apollo 11 landing, in my mind, was faked just so much more implausible, is that it was a civilian program. It was very grassroots. Of course, there was a bunch of money, buttloads of money loaded into this, but the science community was fully on board and there was a lot of transparency, whereas that was just not the case. Even with the science community, they did not know what the military was up to. They did not know what their intentions were all the time with the space program. That was not the case here in the United States. So I do not doubt that there were perhaps some Soviet launches that we may never know about.
Yeah.
Well, my favorite thing that I heard in the documentary about the Soviet, government was that when they realized that they weren't going to be able to get to the moon, they were just like, well, we don't want to go anyway.
Yeah,
so
we never wanted to go.
we never wanted to go. Like, I just thought that was the funniest thing I've ever heard.
Since the dawn of time, governments have just been toddlers tossing the baton.
Well, I didn't want to do it anyway, so.
literally like a teenage girl. Like,
Yeah.
Jesus.
Now that you're there, it's crowded.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting when you look at the way that Soviets used to cover those things up, because in the documentary, I didn't take any notes about this, so I'm just spouting from memory here. There were a lot of cases, specifically with the whole, cosmonaut situation and with other things in the Russian government, where they would remove people from photos and they would remove them from narratives and effectively erase them from history if they did things that were non-Soviet, that embarrassed them, that were, a failure and a disgrace. There was one case, and I cannot remember the specific name, but there was one case where one of the Russian cosmonauts that was supposed to be part of one of the missions to go up into orbit was disgraced, where
He was drunk, right?
He was drunk,
he
and
got
he
drunk
was
on the metro.
Yeah,
and they
he got
ended up
into a
getting into a
fight.
brawl, and someone higher up saw it happen, and I mean, you could take
and they reported it, and he was effectively just removed from history. They literally they took him out of photos, they took him out of narratives that he was in, and they Control Alt deleted him before Control Alt Delete was a thing.
And then he ended up deleting himself because he committed suicide
and he committed
thereafter,
suicide
which is
later.
terrible.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, you know who else committed suicide?
Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein. Maybe
So-
the same situation.
Now I have to bring something
no.
up. If they're able, if the Soviets are able to do these with like all these people, isn't it possible that America has the power to fake a moon landing?
I mean,
Yeah, I think it
absolutely.
is.
I mean,
Listen,
that's just some whataboutism. I don't know. What we're talking about is like, and this
What
is
did you call me?
no, it's a whataboutism. We're saying if they can do that, what about America? America, kind of would do the same almost. And
What about your mom?
what about your mom?
His mom is my mom too.
I'd say, of course, America has the power to fake a moon landing. Did they?
He said it.
No.
Yes.
No, they did not.
Maybe.
He said yes. You heard it. Close
They
the
did
episode.
not.
We're done.
Dub it over and put a yes.
Like a robot. Yes.
But that was something we were talking about earlier with, like, we were trying to distinguish between communism as we saw it in the Soviet Union and fascism. And it's really hard sometimes because that's where it shows how communism manifested in Soviet Russia. The government could literally erase people.
Yeah.
And they did. You know, and
not
it's
just any old person. Like we're talking about like a high up government official, like somebody who was important, somebody who was accomplished, somebody who did shit. This would be like the American equivalent today if like we just
Betsy
tried
DeVoe.
to
Like,
to forget that Betsy DeVos existed. Like
Yeah.
we erased her from
DeVoe.
pictures.
It's French.
Is it DeVoe?
DeVoe? Betsy.
Well, I'm calling her DeVos because I don't respect her, so I'm not pronouncing
It's
her
like
name
Du
correctly.
Bois or Dubois. Like,
But
you
anyway,
know, like,
Betsy DeVos. You know, think of somebody iconic. Think of like I don't know, like Kobe Bryant, rest in peace.
Oh.
If we just tried to erase him from history, if we just he didn't
Kobe.
exist, he was never here.
He
We
doesn't
took it-
exist anymore.
We got rid of all the pictures. We got rid of all the records. He was never here. Nope. Washed our hands clean of him. This is what we're talking about here. You know, they didn't just erase Joe Smo down the street. They erased like people that
and
people
then they
knew.
forced everyone around to pretend that they never existed. It wasn't so much as like they did the picture erasing, and then on top of it, they said, "You all are going to forget this person."
And to that level of collective agreement toward a conspiracy during the arms race,
oh god,
are we to say that America wasn't capable of the same shit?
I am
what
to
makes
say
us think we're better?
The fact that
I
we
know
were
why,
civilian
I know
run,
why we're better.
you know, that's where it just gets to. When you look at Soviet Russia, especially, you know, post-Stalin, there's not a lot of distinctions between many of the other fascist dictatorships in the country, and that was in the world, and that was not the case in America. There was a very large civilian aspect to NASA. There's even a civilian aspect to our military. Of course, there is the power to do things under the rug, but to fake a moon landing when you've got so many people involved that are civilians, wearing plain clothes, working and living in the world, I just doubt it. I doubt it severely, whereas when you look at Soviet Russia and you see total lockdown, total military control over the program, it's more easy to believe.
Listen, people doubted that a president would hire his cronies to go break into the opposing party's political headquarters. But
No,
it happened.
Republicans
So-
doubted.
All right, no, but I'm saying it's
Yikes.
all conspiracy until it's proven right, until it's, you know.
That's fair. That's fair. Nixon was proven right. I mean, it happened. Watergate, the break-in was 72, and he was out of office by 74. We're talking about 2 years. We're looking at 50 years plus.
So tell
now.
me Buzz Aldrin comes forward, right? And he's just like, listen, guys, I'm on my deathbed. Things aren't looking good. I got to tell you something. I didn't step on the moon. It was fake. I was in like Nevada. I was in the desert. I was in Area 51. Is that proof enough for you?
Yeah, I'd be like, why'd you punch that poor bastard that asked you the question then?
Well, maybe
But
because
until
Are
then-
you telling me if some guy comes calling you a liar and coward, even though you are a liar technically, maybe not
and
a
you're
coward,
and you're
he is an American hero.
You're a 1940s teen,
Yeah.
and somebody's
Wouldn't
calling you a
punch him?
coward.
I would take that. I would just.
Yeah.
I mean, no,
And
I think that you
great.
deserve
You know
to be punched
what?
in the face.
I just
Buzz
feel like I
Aldrin
need to
did land
say
on the
this.
moon.
All of you astronauts, I respect you so much.
Oh,
I
yeah.
do believe that it happened, but for the
Yeah.
sake of argument,
I do too.
And
there
for
was no
the
moon.
for the record, JD here, I also believe that we did land on the moon.
Yes.
I just-
Let's clear this up right now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's just
I
clear it
do
up.
want to clear that up because this whole episode, obviously,
we all
went
believe in
into this.
science. We all
Yeah.
believe that it happened. But if we were all
Wouldn't
just
it be
sitting
fun
here,
if it didn't?
yeah,
I'm
wouldn't it be?
thinking
It's
of-
it's the theory.
I'm thinking of all like my high school like science teachers listening to this at some point and be like, "Oh no, Rosemary, no."
Well, when I told my
I
mom
firmly
that,
believe that we landed on the moon,
When I
but there's a lot of good arguments.
when I told my
And
mom
that's
we were
what
doing
discussing.
this, she was like, "Oh, Abby," because I was like, "Well," I'm like, "I kind of believe it." She was like, "Oh, Abby, no," and I was like, "Yeah, I mean, why not?" And she was like, "Abby, please tell me you believe it."
See-
so I get it.
For me, this was an opportunity to really get some anger out because when we worked at the Air and Space, when I worked at the Air and Space Museum, they didn't didn't let us really, take our anger out on these conspiracy theorists.
Would people come up to you?
Did Bart Sibbert ever come up to you
No.
with a Bible?
No, it was always middle school kids. There would be field trips coming in, and we get flat earthers left and right. Oh my God, they were the worst. And we'd
The flat earthers have infiltrated the middle schoolers. That is deadly.
No. The middle schoolers have infiltrated the flat earthers.
Well, it's like when you're at that middle school age, when you're at that adolescent
Little
area.
boy confidence, guys. It's revisiting us.
It is fun. It is so fun to go against the norm. Like
Right.
like a billion people say, "Oh, the sky is blue." Then you're 14 and you're like, "Fuck blue. It's definitely violet, guys."
Yeah.
But we'd have to be very educational when we talk to these people. We'd have to be like, well, no, we actually know that that's not the case because,
you can't say "fuck you, Billy, you piece of shit."
Yeah. Fucking moon landing happened.
I'm going to tell your counselor on you and you're going to get in trouble.
Oh my God.
Let's have a talk about your future there, Jim.
What if those little shitheads drop their backpacks from the top floor of the museum?
I'm sorry. This is one of my favorite stories because that museum, man, sometimes that museum was more packed than Times Square at New Year's. It was like shoulder to shoulder. And one day we saw these middle school kids on the second floor. This isn't funny. It was really dangerous. They were throwing a loaded backpack stuffed with books off, and their friend below was trying to catch it.
Oh my God.
Yo, they're just like, "Hey, we're at the Air and Space Museum. Gravity, bitch."
Now, I know they're remodeling the museum right now. It probably doesn't look like what I remembered it, but if you haven't been to the museum in the past 10 years, that's a big ass drop, man.
Yeah.
We're talking about 60 feet probably.
I've never been in there.
Damn.
I'm imagining like Palisades Mall. Like if you were in the Palisades and you dropped a freaking backpack,
Yup.
it's like dropping a penny off of the Empire State Building at that point.
Freaking
I remember my coworker
Middle
telling me
schoolers,
she
man.
had to deal with that, and I was like, "Oh, haven't had that one yet."
like, what do you even do at that point?
Yeah.
What did you guys do? Let's get
She yelled at him. I mean, she did what she had to do because she was there and she saw it. I'm not gonna lie.
What, you laughed. You egged him on.
She runs up there and like grabs him by the belt and throws him down. Like, "Catch your friend now."
We all know Jake was standing at the bottom with the kid and was like, "Yeah, I think you can catch it. Yeah, throw it down."
You got it. And I saw my boss coming. I was like, "Oh God,
You
I
should have made
ducked
it a teaching moment and like went over there while they were doing it and be like, "And now we can see how gravity pulls things towards the
Yeah,
ground."
if I dropped this backpack loaded with books and this golf ball from the same height at the same time, which will hit the ground first?
This is becoming a math word problem really quickly.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Johnny has 19 bottles of dish soap. Why does he have so many dish soap? Mind your business, David. Such a great Vine.
Oh, Vine.
Yes, I miss
Vine.
it.
Love the Vine days.
So moon landing, guys.
This was a really great episode, you guys.
we wrapped it up pretty good, I think.
By
right?
saying
I
that
think-
we do
that
believe in it. I'm sorry,
We
Mom.
do. We do believe in the moon
We
landing.
believe
It's just
it.
it's so fun to question things. Continue to question things yourself. There's a lot of science out there. Trust the science, but ask those questions and make sure that you back up your answers with science.
And
as well.
don't just back it up with a random Netflix documentary
Like we
episode that
did.
you watch, because apparently that's exactly what
Well,
it did,
right.
so.
But let me tell you, for example, with the conspiracy theories, one I really respect with the moon landing is talking about the flag waving. Because we got into and the light sources. We got into some real science there.
Yeah.
You got one light source. If you see multiple, we can talk about the reflective surface, but you got a scientific point there.
Yeah, you could understand why people are confused.
Right. It's same thing with the windy flag. We got into the surface boundary exosphere. So, I can respect that. There's science there in that skepticism. But if you think the Earth's flat,
just that's it.
I don't know what to say.
Yeah. But hey, thanks for tuning in. This is our conspiracy series theories.
Conspiracy theory series.
Hopefully Jake won't have to work so hard on the next one.
Yeah, we're gonna be coming back to this quite a bit because there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there. I can't wait to tackle.
We did a decently serious one. I want to get into the bad ones at some point, guys. Like really, and we'll get there.
Yeah.
Just keep on watching. So
While
we
you're
can get
still here
there.
with us, please tune into our socials at Chilltime Happy Time, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Check us out on our website, chilltimehappytime.com. And if you look on our little link on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Radio Public, wherever you get your podcasts, there's a new little link down there for support. If you like what we do, you want to see us do more of it, you want to help us do more of it, you can click on there and you can actually donate money to us. You can donate small amounts. You can do it a one-time donation. You can give us a penny. You can send us a high five. I don't think you can do
You
that in
can
the app,
also send us
but-
a lot of money if you feel so.
If you got a lot of money and you want to just do something with it, please give it to
Yeah.
us. We'd love to. Your donations, your contributions help us continue to make this content. We'd love to continue making it because we have fun doing it, and hopefully you're having fun listening to it. If you're at this point at the end of the episode with us, I'm hoping you're having fun. Why else would you be here?
Right. If not, like, go do something
Go
different.
do something else.
Get out of here.
Right?
Go.
Cynical bitch. Get off here.
Thanks for tuning in. Check us out. We'll see you next week. I'm JD.
I'm Rosie.
I'm Abby.
I'm Jake.
And we are out of here. And also hashtag Where's Danny?
Oh,
There's
yeah.
Danny.
We'll be back.
Bye-bye.